welcome back to the Across the Pod NFL podcast. It's time for another team's season preview, and this time the team we've chosen is the New Orleans Saints. And with me, we've got a first timer on the podcast. We've got with us Absolute Radio's Jay Lawrence. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Andy. Appreciate it. Any excuse to talk Saints, you know.
Off camera, he was wearing a Philadelphia Eagles t-shirt about 3 minutes ago, so we almost had that on air, but thankfully he's covered it up with it looks like a Notre Dame.
It is actually. I think it is. I've got a load of. I lived in Norwich for a while, and there's a market there, and there's one stall that sells loads of like American, college merchandise. So you just buy a jumper for a tenner or whatever. So I've got loads of different ones. But yeah, this is a Notre Dame one, and I had the Eagles t-shirt because a friend of mine from Philadelphia, after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, he sent it over. So I have like a Cowboys jumper as well. Lots of different stuff. So. But I am a Saints fan.
And that is why we're here. And that is really a lovely segue into our first question, which is all about, because we ask all of our first time on the podcast the same question as to why you support the team you do, especially fans from the UK. So, Jay, what made you a Saints fan? Now, I already know via your TikTok, but for those who aren't familiar with TikTok, and I will put the link out later on, yeah, what made you Saints?
So I became a Saints fan because basically I lived in New Orleans for a year when I was at university. So I went to university in Norwich, and then which is very different to New Orleans. And then I went to New Orleans for a year, and I got I'll be honest, before that, like American football, NFL, and all of that, it didn't really cross my mind so much. And then I got there, and I was put into this apartment with three people that played for the university was Tulane, so that played for that university. So I had two linebackers and a receiver that I was living with, and it was a little bit like fish out of water and all of that, because I basically was just shoved into a world of American football, whether it was watching it on the TV, whether it was going to see them play, because at the time they played at the Superdome. So my first game at the Superdome wasn't a Saints game, it was a Tulane game. And then, I went to go see the Saints, and I went to go, see them and all of that. And by the time I actually got into it, the season was done. So that wasn't like fantastic. But that year as well was the year that the last time that the Super Bowl was in New Orleans. So I got to experience, that whole time I got to experience, living with these guys that, lived football. I got to experience being in a city which not only had Mardi Gras, had the Super Bowl as well. So that was the infamous one between the 49ers and the Ravens, where the electricity just went out, if you remember.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit bizarre. I had a pretty amazing year when you think about it. I mean, it's quite a good way to get into a sport and quite a good reason to support a team. I feel quite privileged to have been, in that position and been able to do that. And it gave me this sort of foothold into not only a city, but it gave me a foothold into a sport which is for several months a year sort of consumes me. So I've got a lot to be grateful for, a lot to be thankful for.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to New Orleans, went there last season, experienced Halloween in New Orleans, which I don't know.
Oh my, Halloween is amazing.
Oh, it was good. I mean, it was I was told, it's a place to be on Halloween, but I didn't know it would be quite like that. That was something that I felt like I was in Magaluf or Zante when I was there. Like that similar
It's a
sort of
month
vibe.
long. It starts on October 1st, so I remember going on the streetcar because I lived uptown, and, going downtown, on the streetcar, and you go past these amazing houses on St. Charles, and you've got this, and all of them are decked out in like Halloween gear. And then I remember like the best night out that I ever had wasn't during Mardi Gras or anything like that. It was on Halloween. So we went downtown, we went down to Frenchman Street, which is just like behind the French Quarter, and you could not move. You couldn't move. Everyone was sort of dressed up. It was crazy. So yeah, that's one of the best nights I have. So whenever I like talk about Halloween, and it's so funny that you say that, because I don't think you quite comprehend it. It's this American thing, isn't it? Halloween. It's more American than it is British, but in New Orleans, it is just an unbelievable thing. So I'm pleased that you said that.
Yeah, it is quite crazy, and I think that I think I enjoyed it even more if I was 21 again. I think going at
Yeah,
28,
I
maybe not
was.
quite yeah,
Yeah.
not quite the same, but I think yeah, I think I'd have absolutely loved it even more if I was 21. But what I did love, and I know you showed me a picture, which will be on our graphic on this podcast, of you at the stadium. I went there
Mhm.
for a game. I thought it was superb. I mean, you being there as well, you said so. Yeah, your take on the stadium, how good is it for those who are listening or watching on YouTube who maybe haven't experienced a Superdome game? I mean, do check out a vlog if you haven't yet on the game there. But overall, yeah, how would you describe the experience of the Superdome for you?
I mean, it's very different to a lot of stadiums because obviously it is a dome. I know that sounds really stupid and really obvious, but what that means is that despite there being an enormous number of people, like 90,000 people or whatever it is, it feels very intimate because you are all closed in. It's high rather than wide, if that makes sense. It's just quite a claustrophobic experience in the best sort of way. And it's uh, the last time I went there, it was 2019 was the last time. That's the time that I sent the photo from as well. It's just quite an intoxicating atmosphere. And you can't and if you've not been to a game in a dome before, and if you've never been to America and experienced an NFL game, it's automatically going to be different than if you've been in the UK just because of the stadiums, really. The Superdome, it is it's an experience like no other. It's really difficult to try and explain it, really. I think it's because, in when you compare it to, football is in, in this country, in the UK, you got about, 70 to 80% of the people are from the, the home team, and then you've got the away end and all of that. But obviously in the States, you don't really have that. It's 95% of people are going in New Orleans anyway, are going to be the home team. So you've got the whole stadium rooting for whatever happens, whether it's offense or defense. And it just means that everything gets so loud so quickly. You often hear that, don't you? When you're watching the games, the commentators often say, like, the traveling team, they're having trouble communicating and all of that, because they can't hear each other, and that's what domes do, and that's what the Superdome does so well. I mean, you've got this fan base that is so ferocious and has this fever like Saints fans do. It just comes together quite well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there wasn't really a bad seat in the house, man. When me and my friend, who actually went to the first ever American football game in the Superdome, so I mean, what a
Amazing.
way to start. Quite a contrast between that and the Texans, the next game I went to with
Yeah,
them. I found that even when you're walking up towards your seat and you can see sometimes you go like go to toilets or you go get some food on the way to your seat and you can see a glimpse of where you'll sit
that's
of
it.
the view inside the stadium, and then you go to your seat. And it's obviously inside the stadium, it is something else. And I think I'd most compare it probably to a UK stadium, probably to the Principality Stadium or Millennium Stadium, as
Mm.
it's called. I think in terms of that, it's closed off stadium. As you say, it's more high than wide. I think that if you are listening, and we have done an episode on my time in New Orleans, so if you haven't yet checked out, do check it out. I got friends of mine going this year, part of the Dolphins fan club I'm in, but it's yeah, I think anyone who's listening to this podcast, you have to go at some point, and I'm sure you'll agree with me because it is just fantastic. I mean, the weather was good as well, that helped. It was and when I went as well, it was Saints Raiders, so the game was actually a bit of it was actually a blowout in the end.
Oh yeah, I remember this now. Yeah.
And with the Raiders fan base, what the Raiders fan base are like. Add that to the Saints fan base, it was quite a good atmosphere, despite it being, I think it was 24-0 or something like that, the final score. So yeah, it was, yeah, couldn't believe it. And finally, before we go into the off season, favorite memory as a Saints fan.
Favorite memories. Do you know what? I've got a lot more heartbreak memories than I do
Oh God,
as favorite memories, because I lived in New Orleans 2012, right? So just over 10 years ago, and so that means that. But prior to that, I missed the Super Bowl win. I didn't get to experience that, so that would have been the high. But since then, there's been, especially during the Drew Brees era, from about was it 20, it's about 2017 ish, something like that. And then there was three really good seasons being a Saints fan, where basically it looked like every single year the Saints could be in the Super Bowl, but then every single year it was some sort of heartbreak at the end, whether it was the Rams game with the no call, or the Minneapolis Miracle, obviously. There was another Minnesota loss in there as well, and I think that, and the last game with Breeze was that Tampa Bay loss. So there's been a lot of sort of heartache. I think that the only thing that I guess the one thing that I'd say, like, comes to mind isn't necessarily a specific moment, but it is getting to experience what it's like having an extremely competent quarterback in play. As I say, I missed the Super Bowl era, and I missed some legendary Saints teams. But at the same time, so many teams out there, so many fans don't get to experience what it's like having a quarterback that will go down as no doubt like a first ballot, Hall of Famer, because they're that good. You have, if you're a Jets fan, for example, you haven't had a player and a quarterback in 50 years, which you could call like that caliber, So it's one of those things where to experience that, yes, it's over, but to be able to experience that and to be able to every single week watch a game and think, I know that the quarterback isn't going to let me down. If anything, it's not going to be Drew's fault no matter what happens. It's very unlikely it's going to be Drew's fault that that the Saints lose. Then that's something that I suppose you've got to cherish. However, it doesn't give you that Super Bowl experience, I suppose. But at the same time, you take what you can get. And I got several years of the Saints being favorites in basically every single game that they went into, despite the tragedy that happened in the playoffs. But, you experience it, you love it, and you've got to be thankful for it, because who knows if it will ever happen again.
Yeah, I think me and you share somewhat of a similar thing in terms of, for me, it's even more extreme. The fact that I think I was maybe 5 when Dan Marino retired, maybe
Yeah.
4. And in my time, I've been sport fan has been like Jay Fiedler, not Jay Fiedler, but Matt Moore, Ryan Tannehill, Tua Tagovailoa, Ryan Fitzpatrick. So I mean, Tua's
Don't forget Jay Cutler. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget Jay Cutler.
Oh, I mean, the greatest I've ever seen. So I think I think Tua is probably the best I've seen. Who ironically is probably quite like Drew Brees, I think, in his kind of play. But I think that it's certainly I've been starved of a good quarterback, and I'm still waiting one day to have a quarterback I love so much. I want to get their jersey on the back. I've not had that yet. My favourite's probably been Fitzpatrick, just because of his personality more than his play on the field. But
that's not somebody that, as I say, you can go into thinking, no matter what. I mean, I loved watching Ryan Fitzpatrick, but I'm not a Dolphins fan, so it was, or a Bucks fan, or whoever else he played for, Jets, Bills. It meant that it was entertaining, but you don't go into that game thinking Ryan Fitzpatrick isn't going to let me down.
No,
do you know what I mean? And whereas with Drew, it was like every game, you could be down 10 points thinking, Drew's going to get us back. Do you know what I mean? So from that aspect, it's quite lucky. Being 5 years old when Dan Marino retires, that's worse than what I got. I'll tell you that. Yeah.
Right, so let's head into the off season. Main ins and outs in free agency include the likes of Adam Troutman, tight end, quarterback Andy Dalton, Mark Ingram, Marcus Davenport, as well as the likes of cornerbacks Chris Harris Jr. and Bradley Roby. And then the main ins, Jesse James, tight end.
Bradley Roby's still there, I think. Bradley Roby's still there.
Is he? Oh, my apologies. I was looking at the list of players who have left, and he was somewhat on this. Maybe he's re-signed or something.
I think he's probably re-signed, yeah.
Let's have a look. So Wikipedia, the reliable source that is, it does say he's there. Apart from that, other ends include Foster Moreau, Lynn Bowden, and of course the main one is quarterback Derek Carr via the Las Vegas Raiders, which is funny because the game I was at was Saints against Raiders. And then the draft itself, your first round pick was Brian Breesy, the defensive tackle, 29th overall. Isaiah Foskey, defensive end, 40th overall. Kendra Miller, running back, 71st overall. And another one I wanted to highlight because he's a player that I liked in his college tape was A.T. Perry, the wide receiver, 195th overall. So for you, Jay, just overall take on the off-season ins and out for your team?
Well, I mean, I think that they managed to get players in who needed to get players in. I mean, the big thing was really for me, and it happened very quickly in the space of, I think, the first 24 hours of free agency, was the exodus on defense. I mean, in staff as well. I mean, Ryan Nielsen left, he went to the Falcons, and then so many players went to the Falcons as well from the from the defense. So really, it got to the point where it was a case of before free, or around free agency, around the draft time as well. It was you just need bodies, more than anything else. So to get Brian Breesy, who all I've heard about Brian Breesy is that he has been a little bit unlucky in his Clemson career. He was like the number one rated player in high school, a bit unlucky. He had a big injury. He also had a family member pass away as well whilst he was at college. So there's some reasons why he hasn't necessarily been top of his game. But everything I've sort of heard is watch out for this guy. Him being a defensive tackle, we needed a defensive tackle, to be honest with you. Same goes with Isaiah Foskey as well, because you've got Peyton Turner, who is still there with the Saints, another edge, but he hasn't really performed. You've got Marcus Davenport, who left for the Vikings, who was when he played and when he was on form, he was great, but there was a lot of injuries there. And it's interesting actually as well, because prior to the draft, a lot of, Saints fans, a lot of people were saying, if you looked at the measurables, if you looked at all of the traits that Foskey and Davenport had prior to the draft, they were unbelievably similar. Like they were really, really similar. So it's not too much of a surprise that actually they got Davenport left and Foskey came in. So I felt okay about that. Kendra Miller, running back. Again, these are just players that just needed to come in because, there's a chance that Alvin Kamara is going to be suspended. As you said, Mark Ingram's gone. Jamal Williams came in, which is great, but he isn't going to be the number one running back. So again, you want good players, but part of me kind of was just like, at the moment, we just need some bodies as well, especially on defense. And, the Saints defense has been so good for so many years. So, and in terms of offense, Michael Thomas came back, which I was very pleased about. I've got a lot of love for Michael Thomas. I know the past few years hasn't been great for him, like injuries mostly. I'm glad that you say something about A.T. Perry as well, because I've not watched any college tape from him. But again, all I hear about is that, there's a real good chance that he could make the roster. And for being like a 6th round pick in the draft, there isn't any guarantee that that's going to happen, especially when you brought in other players as well, like James Washington, the receiver, came in, Brian Edwards from the Raiders as well. So you've got again, there's a lot of bodies going in. So, but A.T. Perry, I've heard some good things about. So in terms of the big in, as you say, Derek Carr, if you want my opinion on Derek Carr, with Andy Dalton going out, there was a lot of talk like, well, Andy Dalton actually, he did have a good season. And, if you look at his statistics and all that, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if people watch the games, and that's no disrespect to Andy Dalton, because he wasn't a bad player. I don't feel like I was watching the games thinking this guy is doing us a disservice, being a Saints fan and all of that. But sometimes you can just get caught up with the stats and, the ratings and all of that. I don't doubt that Derek Carr is going to be an improvement. And then I suppose apart from that, it's just looking at the other quarterbacks that would have been available at the time that were free agents and then were maybe available via trade. And if you really think about it, I think I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, was the only big quarterback that was traded, obviously, Aaron Rodgers. So then if you take away Aaron Rodgers, which is like a 1st round pick, was it 1 first round, maybe 2 first round picks it will end up being, something like that. So I don't think that was never going to happen. So then you've got to look at it, and then you've got to think it was maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, maybe Derek Carr. Those were probably the only 2 options. I actually don't mind Jimmy Garoppolo at all. Again, injuries, though. He's a lot of injuries. Or do you stay with Jameis Winston? And obviously they weren't. It was obvious they didn't want to stay with Jameis Winston as the number 1 quarterback. So I feel okay about Derek Carr being the number 1 quarterback. Obviously, you could have looked at the draft as well, but we'll forget about that for the moment. I feel okay about it. I feel quite positive in the sense that I think it's going to be that he will be an improvement. The problem is that it's really, as I said moments ago, it's not been that long since Drew Brees was a Saint. So therefore, it's almost like everybody gets compared to Drew Brees. The offense is so similar to when Drew Brees was there. I do think he'll be able to push us further down the field, though. And Jameis Winston, when he was playing early last season, and in the season before that, before he got injured, there's a lot of hesitancy, which is ironic considering that there wasn't, in the years before that. So I feel fine about it. And James being number 2, actually, if you think about it, it's a pretty good room. And we drafted Jake Hayner as well, who also came from Fresno State, which is where Derek Carr came from. So I presume that there was a lot of there was a reason why he was put in. I'm sure there was a lot of good words put in from Derek. So I feel okay about the offseason. I do. I feel like improvements have been made compared to last season. My one concern is you've just got a whole lot of new faces on the defensive line. Is it going to be okay in the on the edge roles as well? Oh, I suppose, and the offensive. I mean, I've just got concerns, but everyone's got concerns about their own team. Offensive line, I suppose. Defensive line, but and is there going to be a linebacker as well? Because I think I feel okay about it. I mean, you make the more I talk about it, the more I feel like I'm just going into my own head about it. The one thing I think is, will the defense be as good as it has been over the last few years, with as much of a changeover as there has been?
Yeah, and I think that in a way you'll help because the division isn't the strongest. I
Yeah.
mean, the Panthers have just upgraded, with Bryce Young, but the Bucks have lost the greatest ever, and the Falcons have Desmond Ridder. No one really knows whether he's going to be the guy for this season. If he doesn't come in, his backup is Taylor
Taylor
Heineke.
Heineke.
So
Yeah.
it's I think in that sense, I think Derek Carr. I don't think I'm not the biggest Derek Carr fan. I think that he is someone that is enough of an upgrade to make you be a challenger for the NFC South. But at the same time, I'm not sure whether I question whether you needed to go for him or not. I think obviously better than Andy Dalton. Don't get me wrong, but a part of me thinks, could you have gone a different route? I'm not sure. But you mentioned defense as well. I mean, you mentioned about everything's okay with Drew Brees there. I mean, everything's okay with Cam Jordan there. You must have that same feeling with him. I mean, he's one of the best ever over the last 10 years in his position. But maybe concerns, maybe would you say, is more the coaching of Dennis Allen? Because last year was obviously his first year being a head coach and wasn't really, didn't really go to plan, basically. And does that concern you at all? The fact that you can have these great teams, you can have Kamara there from even half the season. You've got Michael Thomas if he gets back to some of his best form. Derek Carr's an upgrade. Cam Jordan's there. Tyrann Matthews on the backfield. But does that could all be completely affected by the coaching of Dennis Allen? So is that a concern for you, or would you put last year down to maybe being his first year with the team?
Well, he was, he was with the team. He's been with the team for a long time. I think that you got to make that clear. He was the defensive coordinator for a long time. And he's been an extremely successful defensive coordinator with the Saints for a long time. So it might be his first head coaching role since the failed Raiders debacle, I suppose, a few years ago. Didn't do so well. However, you got to think about what his primary reason in being in that role is. It's not because he's an offensive mind, because he's not an offensive mind. He's a defensive mind, and he's proven himself as an extremely capable defensive coordinator. You had Ryan Nielsen there last year, who was the defensive coordinator in name only, really, to be honest with you, because Dennis Allen was he was running it. So I don't feel so bad about him being there for that reason. It's not as if he's scheming up the offensive plays. Obviously, the buck stops with him totally. However, I think I was more concerned with the offensive play last year than I was with the defensive play. Towards the latter half of the season, particularly, the defense was really great. And that's what we expect to see when we see a Saints defense from the past 5 years or so. But the offense wasn't on fire by any means, and then that partially, I expect, had something to do with, well, obviously the biggest part it had something to do with was Sean Payton was no longer there. This is, one of the best offensive minds, of the NFL, full stop. So he goes, you're obviously going to take some sort of a hit in some way. So his number 2, Pete Carmichael, steps in. So he's been the offensive coordinator for a long time at the Saints. However, again, just like with the Dennis Allen situation at the moment, Sean Payton was the one that was calling the plays nearly all the time. So Pete Carmichael was OC, yes, but was he just OC in name only? So he comes in and he's the one that's calling the plays. And that's thing that concerned me more. I didn't feel like the Saints were lighting it up as much as you'd want them to. You know, yes, you've got Jameis Winston. He gets injured. They decide not to go back to him and they put Andy Dalton in. I'm sure that's going to have something to do with it. But at the same time, it just didn't flow. The one thing that a lot of people picked up on was Alvin Kamara, really, and the lack of the fact that he wasn't really involved in the passing game. This is one of the best pass catchers of the last 5 years, running back pass catchers the last 5 years in the NFL, and he just wasn't doing it. I mean, the stats were hilarious. If you're not a Saints fan, they're hilarious anyway. Looking at it and seeing the fact that he's just not being thrown the ball at all. So I do wonder, is that something that they're going to try and, if we take away the potential suspension, is that something that they're going to try and do a lot this summer? Pete Carmichael, he wasn't fired. There was some, chatter. Is that going to happen? Are they going to replace him as OC? No, they're sticking with him. So I'm not so concerned with Dennis Allen. Granted, if the Saints do awful this year, no matter what happens, even if the defense is absolutely amazing, Dennis Allen isn't going to be, if they win 2 games, Dennis Allen's not going to be the head coach. Though I do think if they win 6, he probably still would be the head coach. But I think that it's more the offense that I am concerned about than I am the defense in terms of coaching.
And what do you think will happen with Alvin Kamara? Because it's been a long sort of delay process. I mean, there was talk of suspension last year. We didn't get one. I'm looking at the news now. I mean, there's something that came out in February, new footage emerging, but not really been anything really since then. I mean, we had the incident, the Pro Bowl in Vegas, etc., etc. But what do you think will happen? Do you think it'll be maybe half a season? Do you think maybe not at all? Like, what's your prediction for how that's going to go down and how long you think he's going to potentially get suspended for?
Well, I don't think it'll be a season. I mean, he is down on an assault charge, I believe, and as you say, there is footage. Or maybe it's battery. I mean, don't quote me on that, to be honest with you. But I know that he is looking I would expect something like 6 games around that. And I think that there's probably precedent that it would be around 6 games. There's a chance it could be a little bit less. It could go up to 8 potentially. If it was a season, I'd be extremely surprised. I don't think that's going to happen. But at the same time, you don't know when it's going to happen either. Is it going to happen before the season? I expect it probably would. And then is it the first half of the season, or does it happen, later in the season with immediate suspension? I don't know, to be honest with you. But that's why getting a running back in the draft and making sure you had a solid number 2 in Jamal Williams was so important, because you don't really know what's going to happen. Last year, Mark Ingram, I am a huge Mark Ingram fan, massive Mark Ingram fan, but he's essentially retired now anyway. I think he's taken a job covering college football. I don't know if he's come out and said he's retired, but he's essentially retired. But he was, he's older. And then you had just a rotating number of people, really. It was like David Johnson was there for a while, it was just, there wasn't another player there, to be honest with you. So improving the running back room, knowing that there's going to be a probable suspension, was really important. So I suspect it will be something around 6 games. But look, I'm not Roger Goodell. I'm not a legal expert by any means. I'm just thinking about precedents. I know that something happened with Ezekiel Elliott a few years ago as well. I believe that was around 6 games. So you've got to think it'll be about that, maybe half a season. So you just need to make sure that you have those players there as well. But, no one really is going to compare to an on-form Alvin Kamara,
Well, of course, I mentioned the game I went to last year. He scored 3 touchdowns that game. So he was
there we go. Yeah.
at his best when I saw him play. But I think that with the suspension, I think that, if Deshaun Watson only got 12 games he got, and also the NFL seems to get longer suspensions for gambling than they do in actual violence. But I think if you go by that alone, and I think maybe 12 would be the most, and maybe 6. The original suspension he got, Deshaun Watson, before that got changed, might be the more.
8, was it? Was it 8 the original one, or was it 6?
It's either 8 or 6. I know it was something that was quite low, and then obviously they changed it. I think like a week later or something. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that will probably have a huge impact on the season. But then again, Jamal Williams come in last season; he was very good. So I think that getting him in, as you say, was absolutely crucial. I think that will be a big thing going into the season. So now it's time for everyone's favorite part of the episodes, where we go through each game and each fan predicts whether this game will be a win loss, or tie for their team. So, first off, week one at home against Tennessee Titans. Win, loss, or tie?
Oh, let's go for the win. Start as you mean to go on and all of that. I think that the Saints have yeah, I mean, we're presuming that Ryan Tannehill's playing quarterback. Don't know who their receivers are apart from Traylon Burks, I suppose, at the moment. So I reckon Saints win.
Okay, and then week two is against a team that's coming next on our season previews on the road to the Carolina Panthers.
Oh yeah, Andy Dalton revenge game. Um, I think it depends there who's playing quarterback as well. Their receivers, they don't really have many receivers either. If they're deciding to play Bryce Young early, that could be a good thing for the Saints. But I think that they're going to start with Andy Dalton. Um, but yeah, I think Saints win again there. I think that Panthers might get into it a little bit, but might be later on in the season.
Hey, and then week three on the road to iconic Lambeau Field, the Green Bay Packers.
Hmm. It's all about the quarterbacks in the first three. And I think that in this one in particular as well, Jordan Love, is he going to start on fire? If he starts on fire, or if he start, I think that could be the first Saints loss of the year.
Hey, I mean, it's fair, the first six games are really games with questionable quarterback dynamics because week four at home to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Saints win.
Yeah, I think that's pretty
I don't.
obvious.
I hope I don't need to expand on that. I think that hopefully the Saints will win that one. If they don't win that one, then yeah, disappointing season is ahead.
Week five is on the road to the New England Patriots.
Um, I think that the Saints are a better team than the New England Patriots. It's just maybe it's like the history of the Patriots, which means that you and R over it a little bit. Um, but I'll again, is Mac Jones going to play like last season or the season before? Um, I'll say Saints win. Oh, I'm being way too optimistic so far. I need to clamber this back.
Week six, on the road to the Houston Texans.
Okay, well, this isn't going to be the one where I clamber it back. Saints win.
This one might be our home to the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, I think this will be a tough game to be honest with you. I mean, I love the Jags. I think it's with the whole UK angle and all of that. Really big fan of Trevor Lawrence as well. Um, I like what they've done this off season too. Yeah, we'll say, but it's at home. We'll say a Saints loss for that one. But that
Okay,
could be that could go either way, I think.
yeah, I think factory against Jacksonville, who I think a team that's on the rise, but you are at home, and I think it's one of those stages where there is actual proper home advantage.
Mm.
So interesting what happens there. But of course, Jaguars are the UK's team, and of course, you had a lot of TikTok last year I saw out in London for the game. So are you going
Yeah.
to any of the
Yeah.
games this year?
Yeah, planning to go to all of the games this year. I was hoping to go to Germany as well, but I don't think that's going to happen. Tried to get some tickets and didn't. Uh, it says something like 1.5 million people are ahead of you in the queue, which is actually madness. So I'm planning on going to all of the games, which means that yeah, I'll see the Jags twice.
Yeah, I'll be there for all three as well.
Yeah,
And I'm hoping through our fan club we'll be getting a ticket to Germany to watch Dolphins Chiefs.
nice.
It's
That I
very
mean, that would be
much,
amazing.
yeah.
That's the one I tried to go to. Well, that's the game that went on sale, isn't it?
Hmm.
Which is probably the best game that on paper in for a few years.
I'd say it's probably the best on paper ever international game. I
Mm.
mean, I can't think of any London game that's had that good of a sort of on paper matchup. I
Preview.
mean,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some games where the actual game no one expects to be good. Or no one expects to be teams that are going for it and end up like Viking Saints, for example, was one of the best games London's ever seen. And I'm gutted that the one year I didn't go to games in London was the one that happened in. But sorry to break
Vikings beat Saints. Oh, that's just something that repeats over and over again.
the pain of your life. We'll
Yeah.
get to them in a bit. They are close by in this schedule. Week eight on the road against the Colts.
Um. Yeah. The thing is that the Saints haven't been great with running quarterbacks. Over the last few years. I mean, obviously the personnel has changed. So again, it's about the quarterback, and I think with Anthony Richardson, out of all of them, he's the biggest one that is the uncertainty factor. You know, is he going to be? People talk saying, "Oh, is he going to be like unbelievable?" You know, because he's got a massive arm and he can run like the wind. But early in the season, let's go with the Saints win. That'd be a disappointing one to lose, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen with Richardson, whether he's going to be like a prime Newton or like a prime Josh Allen, or whether he's going to be nowhere near that. So I think it's
Or if
going
it
to be,
takes a year or two to figure out, because Josh
yeah.
Allen, you know, he's been great for years, but in the first year he wasn't, frankly, but he turned it around very quickly. So you know, hopefully Anthony Richardson will get time
Mm.
to perform, but yeah, hopefully not in that week.
Yeah, and I think the Colts know more than most people that because Peyton Manning took a while to
Exactly.
settle. First year wasn't great, and then look what's happened since. He's one of the
Mm.
best to ever do it. Week 9 is a home game against the Chicago Bears.
Same thing, really. I mean, that'd be a disappointing one to lose. I love Justin Fields. I suppose him and Anthony Richardson have got quite a lot in common at the moment. You know, talking about running quarterbacks and all of that, sort of taking over the league, aren't they? Um, again, it'd be a disappointing one to lose. So again, I'm gonna have to say Saints win. This is how many have I said lost so far? Like
So
two?
far with 9 wins in, yeah, 7-2. So it's
Okay, well,
not
you
the
know, I'll
start.
take that. We've got a few to go. There's a few losses to go.
Yeah, I should hope so. Week 10 before your week 11 bye week is against the arch nemesis of recent times. For you, especially being a fan of the last 10 years, probably the team that's given you the most pain
Hmm.
on the road to the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, I'll put that one down as a loss. It just seems to happen every single time, to be honest with you. And Justin Jefferson is so good. Kirk Cousins gets a lot of criticism, I think, but do you know what? Those two have worked very well so far. So you've got to presume it's just going to carry on, and it'll probably carry on against the Saints. So yeah, that'll be. I'll put that one down as an L.
Hey, and then after your bye week 12, you travel to Atlanta to take on the Falcons.
Saints win. Let's go. Saints win. I'm going to say that against both the Falcons. I think just for integrity more than anything else.
So I'll put it down as a week 18 win as well.
Yeah, yeah. Do that. Do that. Just do that. I like a lot of what the Falcons have done. Actually, I think they've been great. But I mean, Desmond Ridder did nothing to make you think that he was the future there. So you know, if there was Aaron Rodgers or whoever behind, you know, behind center there, then maybe I'll be speaking differently. But he's got it all to prove, Desmond Ridder. And at the moment, I think Saints will win them both. Let's hope.
Yeah, I think the Falcons personally are waiting for Caleb Williams. I think that's why they didn't go for anyone in free agency or try and get Lamar Jackson a bit more. So I think they'll probably, whether that's trading up or whether they have that bad a record, I think they'll be a team that will be looking to try and get him and get that first
Yeah.
overall pick. Week 13, it's a stretch now of 3 straight home games. The first one comes against Detroit Lions.
Oh, I really like the Detroit Lions. I think it's because of Hard Knocks last year, to be honest with you. I mean, just as blunt as that, I really enjoyed watching them. Dan Campbell, their head coach, was with the Saints for a long time in various roles, most recently as the tight ends coach, I believe he was. He's very likable, I think, Dan Campbell. Um, but I think, again, Saints, I think, at home would be favourites in that game. So I'll say Saints win.
Okay, and that means then going into week 14, you take on the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, this is the point where, although it's at home, the Panthers at this point might have got a little bit of steam going, especially if Bryce Young has taken over and he's, you know, maybe it takes him 3 or 4 games to get into his groove a little bit, or maybe even a little bit longer. I imagine that Saints are probably going to lose one of those Panther games. So I'll say this one is the Saints' loss.
Okay, and then week 15, your penultimate home game of the season at home to the New York Giants.
Yeah. I think didn't we have this game last year? I think wasn't it at home to the New York Giants? I can't remember. I'll put this one down as a loss as well. I just feel like no, maybe it was the year before that. Sorry, yeah. Daniel Jones just seems to play very well against the Saints. He has been improving. Um, I like bits and pieces about the Giants. I don't think they're all there, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a game that the Saints lose. So we'll put that one down as a loss as well.
And then we had the Vikings before. This one really is probably PTSD week for all Saints fans as you take on the Rams on the road.
Yeah. Um, I feel like yeah, definitely PTSD, I suppose. On the We'll put this one down as a Saints win, I think. I'm not sure how the Rams are a very uncertain team at the moment, I think, because of last year and obviously they won the Super Bowl the year before that. But I don't think they were the best team the year they won the Super Bowl. But last year they were obviously pretty diabolical. But that was when Matt Stafford wasn't playing. I know there's lots of talk about he's injured, how is he going to be? Blah 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 blah. Let's just presume that he's going to be the Matt Stafford that he always has been, which is an above average quarterback. Not Patrick Mahomes by any means, but above average quarterback. I'll put this one down as a. Do you know what? Actually, this is a Saints loss. I'm putting this down as a Saints
Ooh,
loss.
plot twist at the end. I was thinking even for a win.
Yeah. I just thought, like I wouldn't be surprised if that's a Saints loss at all.
Yeah, I think go back to the Rams. We actually mentioned it briefly on the last episode of the Bills podcast, where basically we said that I do feel like that 13 seconds was the best thing to happen to the Rams. Because I do feel like if the Bills had made a Super Bowl, I think that they would have probably beaten them. I think they were. I think
Yeah,
they were the best team, certainly in the AFC that year. I think obviously, the Rams are lucky the fact that the Chiefs blew a lead. I think the Chiefs could have beaten them, and I think the Bengals, whilst I think they're probably my tip for the AFC this year, I think back then I think they were probably a bit too early to be there. So it's yeah, it's a shame for the Rams, but I suppose we said this before that I think I would take 9 bad years for the Dolphins if it meant 1 year lifting up Lombardi. I think that most fans would take
exactly.
that, unless you're a Patriots fan, unless you're a Chiefs fan, because you're used to success. I think people like you and me would definitely take that.
I would definitely take that. You get to have that one experience of, the euphoria, even if it means that, you've got a few seasons of quite the opposite, but you'll always have that 1 year where you can look back on and be like, that was incredible and have those memories. You'd rather have 1 year of euphoria than loads of years of rubbish than lots of years of, coming third or something, or maybe even second. Look at Bills fans, how many
Yeah,
decades ago that were runners up, I suppose, every, what is it, 4 years in a row. So,
yeah.
and they would have taken one and been completely irrelevant for the rest of the years. So yeah, no, I'm agreeing with that. I'm agreeing with that.
Of course, me and you are both Liverpool fans. Of course, we've had a similar
Oh
experience. I
yeah.
mean, we've had that 1 year where you can look back and go, "Oh, that Premier League was amazing." But a few second places, but we were
But
almost were the
that
Bills at one point.
that year was amazing. That year was amazing. Don't get me
Oh,
wrong, but it was tainted though at the same time because you enjoyed it. However, there was a lot. That was the COVID year,
hmm,
which meant that there wasn't any celebration in the streets. There weren't any people in the crowd when towards the last games of the season. But I mean, Liverpool have been exceptional for years, apart from last year. But it's just ridiculous that Man City are just a machine. So yeah, I can sort of see the similarities there. Yeah.
yeah. I think for me, I can see how it'd be more of an issue for fans who have season tickets, for example. But for someone like myself
Yeah.
who watches most games on a sofa anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
watching
Yeah.
it, I've been watching on that sofa regardless. So for me, I want to see because my brother's a Man U fan, so seeing all these years of him seeing his team win in my childhood win the Premier League, I think I've always wanted to see at least one league title.
Yeah.
I'll always have that. It's on the back of my walls. You can see there's a little frame about it.
I was
So for me,
wondering if that was that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll always I have that in my mind. And I think Rams fans, particularly of the last of a certain age, will probably have that same thing. The ones that are too old, too young for the Kurt Warner team, I think they'll certainly have the same sort of
Hmm.
mentality. Speaking of which, actually, Buccaneers come next. They're one amazing season, and they're on the road again in week 17.
Well, I think I'll put down as the Saints win as well. I mean, the Buccaneers are I think, a lot of people's favourites to finish last in the NFC South. Whether or not that happens, obviously, we'll see. Um, again, Bucks. The two Falcons games I'm being hopeful for. The two Bucks games, I am I would be disappointed if the Saints don't win both of them. I think.
Hey, so that means that you finished with a 10-7 record, which you would think that would, especially in the NFC, would get you at least as a wildcard team in the playoffs. With that record, you would think.
I'm just going to interrupt this by saying that actually I got it wrong in the recording. It should have been an 11-6 record for Jay for the New Orleans Saints.
I think in the NFC South that is finishing first. I'm not gonna lie,
Yeah,
like
that's a good
I
point.
do. 10-7 is achievable, honestly. Like I was the first half of the season, I was like, when I say win for everything, I was like, okay, I'm being way too hopeful here. But 10-7, as a Saints fan, I would be confident that that would get you to the NFC South title. I would maybe the fourth seed, but still, you know, I'm confident.
So you make the playoffs. Your player a division winner, so you'll be in the top 4 seeds. Should that happen, how far do you think the team will go in the playoffs?
Divisional. I think divisional. I think that would be seen as a success for the Saints for sure. I think that would be, you know, but yeah, I could see it being divisional. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we got to the playoffs and then went out in wild card. I'd be extremely surprised if we went beyond the divisional. So I'll say divisional. Anything further than that, if we got to the title game, whoa! I mean, that's unbelievable. Winning a Super Bowl, well, that's very, very, very unlikely. So I'll say divisional. We'll go with that. But anything further than a wild card, I think, is probably a bonus.
Fair enough. So that means that you're you're the 7th person, the 5th person to come on the show. So far we've had 14-3 for the 49ers, 13-4 for the Bills, 11-5-1 for the Ravens, 11-6 for the Seahawks. Do check those ones out if you haven't already listened to those. And then you're there with 10-7. So you're currently our 5th most optimistic fan of the series so far.
Out of 5, did you say?
Oh, sorry, there are 2 more. I forgot about them. 2 Cardinals fans right at the bottom with 5 and 6 wins.
Okay, well, I don't feel we'll disregard those.
Yeah.
But you know, the teams that you mentioned there, everyone except potentially the Seahawks, I would expect to finish with a better record than the Saints anyway. So I'm 5th most optimistic fan out of 7, considering the other 2 are Cardinals. That sounds about right, yeah.
Right, before we go, obviously we will put your details on social media anyway. But if you're listening to this podcast or you're watching on YouTube and you haven't got access to TikTok or Twitter, how can people find you on social media?
Well, if you don't have access to TikTok or
okay, if you have access,
yeah. So you can find me on TikTok if you just type in Jay Lawrence. I'll be there. I think it's JX Lawrence. I think I should know that off the top of my head. Twitter is JLawrence91. My TikTok, I just do a lot of NFL stuff. So if you are an NFL fan, you can just sort of go back and just look at a lot of stupid stuff that I've done and asking people, you know, stupid questions outside NFL games and all of that. So yeah, you can find me on TikTok and Twitter and Jay Lawrence. It's not that common a name, so you can just search for it and you'll find it pretty easily.
And of course, if you have a radio access, of course, you're on Absolute Radio. Is it 8 p.m. every night, you said?
10 p.m. every night. And so Monday to Thursday, 10 p.m. You can catch me on Rock and Roll Football on Sunday afternoons as well. So if you're a football fan, as in British football, then you can, again, it's literally just me talking crap about football. Mostly not so serious crap. So yeah, it's so Sunday afternoons, 10 p.m. as well on weeknights.
Fantastic. So that will be where we end the podcast. So first of all, thank you, Jay, for coming on once again.
Oh, good. Thanks for having me, mate. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. This has been the Across the Pod podcast. I've been Andy. This has been Jay Lawrence. And we will see you guys for our next season preview, which will be the Carolina Panthers. See you guys then.
Boo.